The Morrison government has committed $1.1 billion over 5 years to a women's safety package announced in this week's budget. But many groups say the funding will not be enough to meet the scale of demand. Joining me now live is Hayley Foster, the Chief Executive Officer of Women's Safety New South Wales. Hayley, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. Firstly, what's your reaction to the funding announcement?
Thank you, Danica. Look, we're really pleased to see in this budget an increased focus on women's safety from the government. I think they've heard loud and clear from the Australian people that they want this issue prioritised. We don't want to wake up week after week to another dreadful homicide. So we are seeing an increased focus. We're also seeing some very exciting announcements in this $1.1 billion package over 5 years that are very targeted and very much based upon what the evidence has provided and the experts are saying is needed. I guess what we would point out is that this is a starting point. And of course, Minister Susan Ley mentioned that as well. In Parliament, she said, and in the statement indeed, it says that this really is a down payment as we look forward to the Women's Safety Summit at the end of July. And from there that we expect further investment to flow.
How far do you think the funding will go in terms of making the positive long-term changes that a number of groups like your organisation have been calling for?
Yeah, look, I think this budget reflects a little bit of sort of that long-term visionary work around primary prevention and laying some of the groundwork. Really is setting up some really good data so that we can start to measure our success. So that's really, really important. I guess what we would say is that we're still not closing all of those service gaps. So across the country, we actually estimate that we need a $1 billion per annum investment or $3 billion over 3 years to actually fill those service gaps so that people who are experiencing violence and abuse can have access to universal services. So look, we know already that 1 in 3 women and girls who are trying to seek accommodation to escape violence are unable to do so. And in fact, it's worse even more for those who are wanting to stay home safely with the abuser removed. We estimate that 9 in 10, in fact, are unable to access those services. So we do have some critical gaps to fill, and we're hopeful that following the summit in July that we will start to see significant investment flow.
And just how high is the demand right now for victims of domestic and sexual violence who are trying to seek out these essential services?
Yeah, it's never been busier. There have never been more women and children coming forward seeking support and safety. We experienced our member services, the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Services in New South Wales, supported over 53,000 women last year, and that was a 35% increase in the number of services provided. Demand is not going down. And I think that's something that the government is recognising and why they've continued that COVID supplementary funding, which recognised our unprecedented demand levels, really to tide us over until we get a really good national plan that is, as Minister Ruston has suggested, comprehensive and robust and looks at filling those gaps comprehensively for the first time. Look, we've never really invested properly in domestic violence services and responses to make sure that we have universal access to them no matter where you live, particularly in regional areas. There are some significant service gaps, and if we want to achieve a substantial reduction in violence against women in this country, we really need to ensure that there are those universal services and that women and children can actually escape and have accommodation options, for example, to do so.
Another interesting element of the funding package announced in the budget was investment in data collection, particularly among Indigenous Australians. How important is it to get it right, particularly in those communities?
Yeah, it's really, really important, and we're very pleased to see this investment in data. I mean, at the end of the day, we cannot measure our success and we cannot measure what's working and what's not if we don't have quality data. So this is very welcome, as is an increased investment in the family violence prevention legal services. Again, more gaps will need to be filled there. Women's legal services across the country, as well as indeed over $50 million for Indigenous-led solutions on the ground. We're pleased to see that. Of course, we all know there is more to do, but if we can't measure our success, we can't measure what's working and what's not, then it's going to make it very difficult for us to make some gains.
What happens next, Hayley? Of course, there is that summit that's occurring soon. What sort of changes are you hoping for in the short term?
Yeah, look, I think one of the significant gaps that was quite apparent, and I'm sure the government was called out for it, was that we do need more investment in emergency and social and affordable housing and those safe at home programs to support people to stay home safely. That's probably the biggest gap. And of course, we want to see more primary prevention. We want to see more services to support people to change their behaviour if it's problematic. And we want to make sure that, we're stopping this behaviour before it starts in communities. So I think that there needs to be significant investment in that. Australians want to see this come down. They want to see a decline in violence against women and children and violence generally. We need to make sure we're making generational changes to achieve that. I think that we will see that emphasis after the summit. I think the government will hear that loud and clear from experts right across the board.
Fingers crossed. Hayley Foster, great to chat. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Lovely. Thanks so much for having us, Danica.